I will never forget that early morning. It was 3 o'clock on a perfectly ordinary Tuesday, and the phone's ring sliced through the silence of my house like a blade. The number was private. Normally I would have ignored it, but something inside me, a premonition, perhaps a voice, made me answer. On the other end, a male voice was trembling, carrying a fear that seemed torn straight from the soul. Señor Gibson, tiene que escucharme. Trabajé 22 años en el Vaticano. Sé lo que van a anunciar el 20 de diciembre. Y no le están diciendo la verdad a nadie. Por favor, investigue esto antes de que sea demasiado tarde. And then, silence. The line went dead. I tried to call back, but the number had vanished. I spent minutes staring at the phone as if waiting for it to explain what had just happened. In 30 years of research and filming about the inexplicable, I had already heard every kind of story. Angels, miracles, phenomena that defy reason. But that voice wasn't seeking fame, wasn't looking for attention. It was pure terror. Terror of something he knew he wasn't supposed to know. And a date, December 20th. Something would be announced that day. Something serious enough to make a man from the Vatican risk everything to warn me. I stayed awake until dawn, trying to understand. When the sun rose, I decided to act. I had 42 days to find out what the hell was going to happen before Christmas. 42 days to confront something that seemed to go beyond human understanding. I began by contacting my old allies, people who live among shadows and secrets, an intelligence analyst in Brussels, an astrophysicist from the Canary Islands, and a former UN official living in hiding in Argentina. I sent encrypted messages to each of them. Is something scheduled for December 20? Something capable of terrifying the Vatican? The first reply came from the astrophysicist. 3 words. Llámame, es urgente. When I finally reached him, his voice sounded exhausted, like that of a man who had already given up on sleep. I don't know how you got that date, he said. But yes, there is something. Something we've been monitoring for 8 months. We were instructed not to comment, not even among colleagues. The orders come from very high up. NASA, Roscosmos, even agencies that officially don't exist. I pressed him. I wanted to know what it was. He took a deep breath before answering. There's an object approaching Earth. It's not an ordinary asteroid, it's not a comet. It moves in ways that defy the laws of orbital physics. It accelerates when it shouldn't, changes direction without apparent cause. And the most disturbing part, it emits signals. Complex mathematical sequences as if they were messages. I fell silent. Messages? I asked. Yes, he replied. Sequences that seem designed. 3 weeks ago we managed to partially decode them. It's a countdown or a warning, we don't know, but it ends on December 22nd. My blood ran cold. 2 days after the Vatican announcement, I hung up and sat motionless, processing everything. An unknown object, intelligent signals, a date that matched the warning from a desperate man. Everything was converging, and somehow the Vatican was involved. That afternoon, my contact in Brussels replied. The message was simple but devastating. Look for the Cascada Oscura protocol in the European Union archives. September. Classified. Civil contingency plan. Hours later, I received an encrypted link. The document described a plan to deal with an uncontrolled global disclosure event. It was essentially a manual to prevent societal collapse if information about the true nature of reality and the presence of non-human intelligences were released. The instructions included communication control, military mobilization, travel restrictions, and psychological preparation for the massive ontological shock, the moment when humanity discovers that everything it believes about itself and the universe is false. The time window mentioned in the protocol was between December 18th and 24, exactly the period of the object's supposed appearance. Coincidence? I no longer believed in coincidences. 3 days later, I received a package. No sender. Inside, a USB drive and a note. What is here will give you context. Seek the signal in the bells. I opened the contents cautiously. Hundreds of scanned documents. They were copies of Vatican files, letters, reports, prophecies, some dating back centuries. The recurring theme, La llegada de los observadores. Not a second coming of Christ, but something different. Beings of light who descend when the sky opens in cold fire at the time of the Savior's birth. A letter from 1347, signed by Clement VI, described, "I saw beings of light who are not angels. They will descend when the stars sing. They do not come to save us, but to judge whether we have matured, and I fear we have not." I leafed through document after document. Every century brought similar accounts. The appearances always occurred near the winter solstice, always at moments of civilizational crisis. Among the recent files, a 2020 memorandum sent chills down my spine. A group of Vatican theologians and scientists discussed how to prepare the Church for the imminent discovery of non-terrestrial intelligence. The text recommended that the Pope issue a statement reconciling faith with the new paradigm, affirming that God's creation extended beyond humanity. But in the margin, someone had written by hand, "And what if they are not God's creation?" That question haunted me for days. I decided to contact an old friend in Rome, Father Alessandro, a Jesuit historian. When I arrived at the Vatican, he was waiting for me in the silent corridors of the library. His sunken, tired eyes said he knew more than he could tell. He led me to a private room, locked the door, and spoke without preamble. "The documents you have are real. And yes, the Vatican will make an announcement on December 20th. It will not be a mass. It will be a global broadcast. The Pope will declare that humanity is not alone in God's creation. He will reveal that for decades we have maintained contact with non-human intelligences, and that on the 22nd they will manifest." I felt the air leave my lungs. I asked why. "The ultimatum came from them," he answered. "Either we prepare humanity, or they will do it their way." I remained silent, watching the faint light reflected on the wall crucifix. The Catholic Church, guardian of faith for 2,000 years, was about to admit that other intelligences, created or not by God, existed, and that something was coming to meet humanity at the solstice. Father Alessandro lowered his head and murmured, "They are neither good nor evil. They are indifferent, and that is what scares me most. When one civilization observes another, it does not necessarily wish it well. Sometimes it merely records before closing the experiment." At that moment, I understood that something unprecedented was about to happen, and that the world as we knew it might not survive Christmas. I returned to Madrid with my mind in turmoil. During the flight, I looked out the window and saw the sunrise painting the clouds red, a beautiful but unsettling sight. I thought of Father Alessandro's words, "They are neither good nor evil. They are indifferent." That sentence echoed in me like a verdict. If the Vatican was preparing for public contact with non-human intelligences, what did that say about everything we believed? In the following days, I sought answers outside institutions. I looked for testimonies, accounts from people who claimed direct experiences with these observers. Most were fanciful, but some accounts unsettled me with their clarity. A physics teacher from Scotland described something that chilled my blood. She said that in July she had received a mental download of information, not voices but images, instant knowledge. "I saw Earth from afar," she told me via video call. "I saw possible futures, and all of them converged on one point, December 22nd. I asked what she saw on that date. She replied, "In some paths humanity awakens, in others it collapses. Everything depends on how we react to the truth that will be revealed." A Japanese engineer reported something similar, luminous figures beside his bed, showing cities under energy domes and crowds in trance. The phrase he heard was, "The dark solstice will bring the measurement." A Brazilian musician described a total car blackout, a blue light in the sky, and a mental voice saying, "Judgment arrives at the time of birth." 3 testimonies, 3 continents, the same message. Something would happen at the solstice. I began to feel I was dealing with a cosmic choreography, a carefully synchronized script. I contacted my astrophysicist friend again. I asked him the size of the object. "Gigantic," he replied. "Perhaps hundreds of kilometers in diameter. On the 22nd, it will remain motionless over the Western Hemisphere for 6 hours, and then move to the Eastern for another 6. It will be visible to the naked eye, not as a point, but as a living geometric structure." I was speechless. He continued, "The emissions are intensifying. One layer is mathematical, another biological, patterns similar to DNA. And there is a third that no one can decode, perhaps a language of consciousness. And there are side effects. Those who listen to the recordings dream, have visions, as if the message installs itself in the mind." I then remembered a Latin note I had read among the Vatican documents. The messengers from the stars do not speak with tongues of flesh, but with fire directly from the mind. I understood that the event would not only be visual, it would be interior, psychological, spiritual. To understand the pattern, I consulted the German historian Marcus Rütter, a specialist in ancient mythologies. I told him part of what I knew. He replied, "All civilizations record visits from beings from the sky. Anunnaki, Neteru, Mayan gods, Vimana. They are called instructors, sometimes judges. They appear when societies are on the brink of ruin or rebirth. Perhaps they are not divinities, but observers of an experiment." I fell silent. He added, "Almost all traditions speak of a final evaluation. Universal judgment, Kali Yuga, Ragnarok, fifth sun. The form changes, the meaning is the same. Humanity will be tested and will undergo transformation or destruction." I hung up feeling that an invisible piece had fallen into place. The event announced for December was not new. It was the same cycle, repeated in another era. But now it could not become myth. There would be cameras, networks, witnesses. I locked myself in my studio for 3 days. I gathered all the data and tried to form a picture. This is what I saw. First, the Vatican would reveal the existence of non-human intelligences and their continuous communication with Earth. Second, governments would confirm, claiming secrecy to avoid panic. Third, the object would become visible on December 22nd. Fourth, during its appearance, there would be a direct transmission to collective consciousness, an inner selection. According to the Vatican texts, those who vibrated in love and compassion would experience it as expansion. Those dominated by fear would plunge into mental collapse. It was not salvation or condemnation, but resonance. The documents called it separation of frequencies. That idea haunted me. What if part of humanity simply switched off internally without physically dying? A death of the soul. I kept trying to contact the mysterious informant from the first call. I left messages on secure channels. 18 days before the announcement, I received a reply. Iglesia de Santa María in Trastevere, Roma, mañana 15:08. Hombre con libro rojo. I took the first flight. At exactly 3 o'clock, I entered the church. The golden mosaics glowed like divine fire. A man in civilian clothes was carrying a red-bound book. He sat down, left the volume on the bench, and went to pray. I took the book. Inside was a note. El anuncio del 20 no es opcional. Nos dieron un ultimátum. La iglesia está dividida. Algunos los ven como ángeles, otros como demonios. Yo creo que son otra cosa. Reza por nosotros. When I looked toward the altar, the man had vanished. I returned to Madrid that night, carrying the weight of centuries of secrets. During the flight, something changed in me. For the first time, I felt that this was not an invasion, but a spiritual test. Perhaps we were being evaluated not to be punished, but to see if we were ready to climb one step on the cosmic scale. I began to meditate. I wasn't seeking miracles, only silence. And in that silence, I realized something simple and profound. The key would not be technology or power, but consciousness. The criterion of evaluation would be love. With 16 days left, I began writing my testimony. Not an article, but a confession. I wanted to publish on the 19th, one day before the announcement. As I wrote, synchronicities began to surround me. People mentioning the 22nd without knowing why, books opening to the right page, coincidences that seemed choreographed. Markets began to fluctuate without explanation. Sightings multiplied. On December 14th, an electromagnetic blackout hit northern Europe. They said it was a solar storm, but the sun was calm. The astrophysicist called me. It was a demonstration. They can turn everything off. The next 10 days were surreal. Vivid dreams, visions of the object shining in the sky. In every dream, the same message. No teman, confíen. Esto es necesario. On the 18th, I received the last message from Brussels. El protocolo Cascada Oscura se activará a medianoche del 19. On the morning of the 19th, I published my account. Half called me crazy, half thanked me. That night, I didn't sleep. The whole world seemed to vibrate on the same frequency of expectation. December 20th dawned cold. At 10 a.m., Madrid time, I turned on the television. The Pope appeared alone in a white room. He said, "Hermanos y hermanas, Lo que voy a decirles cambiará para siempre nuestra comprensión de la creación de Dios. I took a deep breath. Durante décadas, la Iglesia y los gobiernos han sabido una verdad que callamos. La humanidad no está sola. Existen otras inteligencias que nos han observado por milenios y ahora desean manifestarse. Hearing him was like watching the axis of the world shift. He spoke for half an hour, asking for serenity and faith. He said that on December 22nd, these intelligences would show themselves and that we should receive them with love. When he finished, the planet fell silent. Within minutes, presidents, prime ministers, and religious leaders confirmed everything. Some spoke of hope, others of diabolical deception. The streets erupted in contrasting reactions: tears, prayers, riots. I saw tanks in the avenues. The protocol was active. On the 21st, the initial panic gave way to a strange calm. The world counted the hours, and then came December 22nd. I woke before dawn. I went to the balcony. The air felt different, dense, electric. At exactly 11 o'clock, a light appeared on the horizon. It grew until it dominated the sky. It was not a star. It was a living structure formed by geometric patterns that changed as if breathing. And then, it happened. There was no sound, no flash, only consciousness. Suddenly, everything inside me opened. I saw all of humanity as a luminous web. I saw the observers above, not as gods, but as scientists of an impersonal love. I understood that our entire history was an experiment to discover whether a species can transcend the ego and recognize itself as one. I felt every person, every emotion, joy, fear, faith, despair, all simultaneous. It was as if the universe was breathing with us, and I realized we were being measured, not judged. The collective vibration would be our answer. I don't know how long it lasted. When I came back to myself, I was on my knees, crying. The sky remained luminous. Televisions around the world showed people in ecstasy, others in collapse. Hospitals overwhelmed, but also inexplicable healings. Wars ceasing. Embraces between enemies. And then the final understanding came without words. We had passed, but barely. The collective message said, "Tienen una ventana. Evolucionen. Si no, serán aislados." The object remained visible for 6 hours and then became transparent until it disappeared. In the following days, the planet was different. There was chaos, yes, but also an unprecedented wave of collaboration. Nations that had been enemies began working together. The UN proposed a new global council of consciousness. Corporations re-evaluated priorities. Now, months later, I write these lines looking at the same sky that once terrified me. The observers have not returned, but their presence is constant, like a breath behind the world. And I realize that the true announcement was not made by the Pope, nor by governments. It was made by the cosmos itself, speaking directly to the human soul. You were never alone. Something terrible did happen before Christmas, yes, but also something wonderful. The terrible was seeing our reflection without masks. The wonderful was discovering that there is still hope. We are a species in transition, a people beginning to remember who we are. And as I write, I hear in the distance the sound of bells. Perhaps it is coincidence, or perhaps it is the promised signal, the reminder that we were called not to fear judgment, but to awaken,